This assignment is the social construction of race and the eventual development of African American culture. For this assignment, you want to have an understanding of these terms. You want to use the sources sheet. As we go through this slideshow, you'll see some of the sources, and then of course you have the themes that will be addressed. Now in this slide, what I'm trying to get you to think about are racial theories, where they come from. So what is the first image that enters your mind when you fill in the blank for these various terms here? Now, we're not going to do this out loud. This is all private. And keep in mind, if any of the images that enter your mind are negative, it really doesn't make you a bad person. It's really to show the influence that society has conditioning us when we hear these particular terms. For example, these two right here, this is using Blumenbach's theory on race. If you're using the term Caucasian and the person is not from the Caucasus area, you might be wrong. Keep in mind, sometimes we merge religion with other groups. A Puerto Rican, according to the US Census, can be Hispanic. Now, the reason why we're doing this activity is to point out the social construction of these supposed racial theories, when in all reality, there is one race, a human race. This slide is looking at some additional terms: ethnicity, when you have a common ancestry, culture. There's various cultures, football culture, car culture. It's a common pattern of human activity. When you assimilate, it's about you dropping aspects of your identity in order to fit in, and then nationality is more about your nation. That might be the way you identify yourself. Keep in mind, for this class, we're going to be thinking about race from a biological point of view. We all have eyes, we all have a nose, we all have a mouth, and we all have ears. When we start buying into, this individual is inferior, this individual is superior, this individual is black or white, we are buying into a social construct. So here are some of the theories behind the development of race. Blumenbach is the individual who came up with the idea of race as a color: black, white, red, yellow, and so on. Francis Galton was trying to prove that there were superior and inferior races, and he did this by conducting various basic research like comparing skull sizes. Here we see a piece from his work, Africa for the Chinese. And the reason why we want to look at these terms is because these terms are used by these racial theorists, and then the laws kind of reflect the use of those particular terms. So here he's looking at the Arab, the Chinese. Here he's looking at the people from Africa, India, and China, and he's basically saying some pretty negative things. But again, these are the supposed racial theories, and this is going to have some credibility for the 1800s, and the laws will reflect some of these ideas. When we're looking at people from Asia, here's a Google search for the Mongolian race, which has come up already on some of the slides. And this individual, John Langdon Down, would have, some of a role in shaping our understanding in the 1800s of people from primarily China. Here we see some more research, supposed research: the Chinese, the Mongolian, the yellow race. And ultimately what Downey did was he looked at people with Down syndrome, and he looked at the epicanthic fold of people with Down syndrome, and he compared it to people from China, and he argued that there was something genetically similar between the two groups of people. Again, why is this important? Because these racial theories for the 1800s was the science for that particular period, and sadly some of the legislation reflects some of these particular ideas. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you a series of slides, and you want to determine if the image is race, culture, nationality, or ethnicity. Keep in mind you might differ with some of the responses. So in this image, what is it? The best answer is culture, and it's based on the religious identifiable clothing. In this image, we want to focus on the flag, and the argument here is going to be nationality. Now keep in mind she may be using the flag, and maybe she holds her Puerto Rican identity into in more regard than anything else, and that's why we're using a nationality. This image, race due to Bloom box color classification. How about this image, living in this area? We're going to go with ethnicity due to Arab being an ethnicity, common ancestry. For this slide, we're transitioning to the vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle, as I said before, we have these laws, and the laws are big ticket items. These are the institutions, whereas prejudice and discrimination is micro, it's smaller. This could be you saying something offensive to somebody else. You really have no power. However, if you were a person making a decision about which groups should be allowed in the military, because the military is a big institution, that's a social disadvantage. So why does this matter? Because when you have these issues emerge, a belief in inferiority usually develops. That's exactly how they overturned Plessy Ferguson, where they gave black and white dolls to children, and they asked questions like which doll is good, which doll is bad. And because the children were so young and they associated the white doll with goodness, and they said things like they didn't want to be the black doll, they wanted to be the white doll, they already at an early age had a belief in inferiority. Where does that come from? The social disadvantages, as well as the prejudice and discrimination. Now we're transitioning to the impact of the racial theories in legislation. So a couple things we want to focus on here. We already addressed permanent involuntary hereditary servitude, the status of the mother. Here we see the term phenotype highlighted, which tells us these are terms that we want to have an understanding of. The one drop rule, any person with any degree of African descent as part of a singular inferior status. So they're using racial theories to develop legislation. And as far as the images down here go, here's what's going on. We have a free male who engages in a relationship with a slave woman, and the end result is a child. At first, the child would be free because social status is determined by the male, but eventually the social status would be determined by the mother, as the law would be changed to say social status is determined. In this image, we have a white woman engaging in a relationship, which probably would not be the route to go, because if you decide to, for example, get married, the law is going to say that your social status is now determined by the male. Since the male is a slave, that would make you a slave as well as the child a slave. What was different about the female slave experience? Here we're looking at some more legislation. Children got by any Englishman upon a Negro woman should be slave or free. That seems to be the issue of debate. Here they're talking about having sexual relationships. So what we know is that through the laws eventually are changing, because there has to be some form of reproduction that's occurring between black and white, which is changing the potential social status of the child. Here we want to look at this passage, and the question here is, who owns the child? So if somebody engages in a relationship with this individual and this person is free, the child that is produced, as they're saying here, a mother's rights she may not claim, for the white man's can part her darling from her bursting heart. So that is a reference to the female experience. Then we transition to the African American culture, and we already looked at some of the instruments. Keep in mind, as the Africans are coming over from Africa, they're bringing their African identity. They find themselves in the United States, and it's about merging culture one with culture two, and I guess you come up with something unique, which is why I use the term hybrid. Some images of the instruments from the enslavement reading. It talks about dances, folktales, music, magic, and language patterns. And again, this is all about merging of the culture, talking about instruments. An image from the AP framework. And we're back to the enslavement reading. You might want to click these links to get an example of the different styles, because this section is about rhythm. And again, it's about bringing your identity from Africa to the Americas as you experience slavery. This section is looking at music and its influence with religion, Christian hymns and the spirituals, the instruments that were used once again, and some of the music that comes out of the institution of slavery. And when we're looking at the spirituals and the Christian hymns, we're looking at the role of religion, some of those moral tales, and how the religion is playing a role in providing some sort of hope. For example, I ain't got long to stay here. That could be a reference to the end of life and how that might be this person's freedom. What you're going to do here is read this excerpt from Frederick Douglass. It is a first-hand account of slavery, and you want to focus on what this particular experience was like. We have another page, another image from the AP framework. Storage. It says here that he created a range of topics including love, family, spirituality, and slavery, and these were things that were inscribed on this particular jar. Again, from the enslavement reading, it talks about how Africans tried to hold on to their African culture. This will take you to a clip of Roots, and in this image, which is a image of a clip from the movie where the slave master is having the slave in question beaten until he recognizes his slave name. So in the image that you're going to watch here, it's about the individual trying to hold on to his African name, and it's an example of slave breaking. It's about trying to hold on to your culture and resistance. We might watch this episode of Blackish, which addresses this particular issue. Now at the end, what you want to do is look at the terms, and you should be able to have an understanding of the terms that were used here. You want to also complete the framework for the sources. And if you want to check your definitions, feel free to use the last two slides.